In today's story, we're going to talk about a couple of soldiers that fought with a storied unit, a storied coupling of units, really, called the Iron Brigade, Black Hatters. They were known primarily by the hats that they wore, and when soldiers saw those hats from far off in the distance, those Confederate soldiers knew that they were facing a foe that was going to put a real hard fight to them. As a matter of fact, coming into Gettysburg on that first day, Confederate soldiers had actually seen those hats from a distance, and one was quoted as saying, "'Tain't no militia, it's the damn black hats." Imagine having a uniform on, an item that from off in the distance, the item drove fear into your enemy because they knew the reputation of the men wearing those hats. Well, that's what we're talking about here. We're going to talk about two of those soldiers and kind of follow them through the fight and just briefly cover everything that happened and what happened after the war. I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy it. The men of the Iron Brigade marched into Gettysburg from the west. They wore tall black hats and blue wool. They were Midwestern men, Wisconsin, Indiana, Michigan, and they had fought before. They had taken heavy fire at South Mountain and Antietam. They had held when others ran. That day, July 1st, 1863, they walked into something worse. John Reynolds rode ahead to place them. He was killed almost at once. A bullet, it tore through his neck. He fell from his horse. Sergeant Theodore Dosh Bond of the 2nd Wisconsin fell not far from him. A bullet hit him low on the left side of his chest. He went down hard. He crawled or limped, no one knows exactly how, and made it to the Adams County Courthouse. It had become a hospital. He stayed there a while, and the town filled with wounded, and the sky stayed thick with smoke. Bond had been born just a few miles away in York County 30 years earlier. His mother died when he was young. He was sent west to Wisconsin to live with his uncle. He made a life there. When the war started, he enlisted as a sergeant in Company H. He had already been shot once, shoulder wound at First Bull Run. Afterward, he served with the engineers for a time. He rejoined his regiment in January of 1863. The wound at Gettysburg ended it for him. In 1864, he joined the Veterans Reserve Corps and worked as a clerk in the hospital in York. He later went back to Wisconsin, married, then returned east to York County. He sold lumber, then hats. He lived to be 78 years old and died in 1912 of pneumonia. 2 children outlived him, his wife, Hattie, too. You see, it's common soldiers like that really, they bring these stories to life, this battle to life for people, everyday people. And can you imagine being from York County, Pennsylvania, which is not too far from Gettysburg, and throughout time, you're shifted west to end up eventually enlisting in the Iron Brigade. And then you come back to fight against this foe that will not stop, this foe that has become such a powerful army in the eyes of everyone at that time. And you end up making your way all the way back to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, not too far from where you were born. And on the very first day of that battle, you're hit in the chest. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was to take a bullet in the chest, especially in those days, I probably wouldn't think that I was going to live past that day. But somehow he fought and he held on, and he made his way through that day. He's not too much different than the other guy that we're going to talk about in this story. Not too far from Bond that day stood Captain George C. Gordon of the 24th Michigan. The regiment was new to the brigade, but already tight and proud. That morning they had 496 men. By the end of the day, 316 of them would either be dead, wounded, or missing. But Gordon stood fast that day. One of his sergeants had been hit, stunned by a ball, but came to and he found that the captain was still at his post. He said, "I never saw a man stand with such determined energy." You see, Gordon kept the line together and everything was coming apart. His captaincy had begun the year before. He had left behind a wife named Carrie and her 2 children. He was a big man. He was quiet and strong. And originally he was from Canada. But he was orphaned at a young age, and he was sent to Michigan. He had taught school, studied law, and he had joined when the 24th was formed. At Gettysburg, Gordon fought until he could fight no more. Confederate troopers captured him as the Union lines gave way. He was sent first to Libby Prison in Richmond, then down to Georgia and South Carolina, Macon, Columbia. He spent 20 months in captivity altogether. On February 14th of 1865, during the transfer by train, he escaped. He was sick. He had no shoes, and he wore almost nothing. For 3 weeks he wandered the woods. At one point, a Confederate patrol caught him. The guard fell asleep, and Gordon ran. Enslaved people helped him find the Union lines. He got back to his company in May, and the war was ending. The sergeant who had admired him at Gettysburg was gone, captured the summer before, and sent to Salisbury Prison in North Carolina. Gordon entered the war with a brevet promotion to major. He went back to Michigan and rejoined Carrie. They had 4 more children, 6 in all. He farmed, served as a justice of the peace, superintendent of schools. But he would die on August 27th of 1878, and he was only 45 years of age. The war had taken much from him. His funeral was held 2 days later, 16 years to the day after he marched off to war. The Iron Brigade never fought the same after Gettysburg. It lost too many good men that day, but it stood when it mattered the most. The Black Hats went forward and held the line. Bond lived long and quietly, but Gordon died young. Both had stood on that first hard hour at Gettysburg, and they did not break. See, the one good thing about podcasts like these, like the ones I'm doing right now, is we have the freedom to explore other stories without having to worry about telling something from a dramatic point of view or how many people are going to listen to this or what have you. I do this strictly for the purpose of telling history like it is, telling you guys the stories of the American Civil War, and then covering smaller, lesser-known stories of these people that fought at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, or other battles. I have a human interest book that comes from Gettysburg. And it says, Human Interests of the 3 Days Battles of Gettysburg. And it looks pretty old. I picked it up in a store not too long ago. Matter of fact, it's about as old as I am, probably. About 1980s, early 1980s. But to kind of tell you how things have changed since then, stories like the one I just told you about those two soldiers fighting there on the first day, they're just now coming out into books and other things being captured as individual stories for you to hear about. Books like this human interest story of the 3 days at Gettysburg, this older book only goes through the major stories that we all have had beat in our heads since the book Killer Angels came out, or since the movie Gettysburg came out. It talks about Pickett's Charge, Devil's Den, the Virginia Monument, the death of General Reynolds. The majority of the time when you hear a story told there on that first day, you hear about the fires, the campfires off in the distance on the mountain that the Union soldiers and the townspeople were able to see. You hear the story of how John Buford saved the day by deploying his men properly and slowing down the rebels as they're coming into town. And then you hear about how John Reynolds came up in the nick of time, only to be shot down in the prime of his life as one of the most promising officers of the American Civil War. And some even harped on the idea that John Reynolds was more promising than General Meade. I would argue against that myself. But these stories are the ones that we like to tell. They're the ones that Gettysburg themselves, the citizens there, have held on to and told for generations. And the signs highlight the same stories. But there's something else to it. There's something more human to these stories. We have to tell the stories of people that no longer have voices. And that's what I like about this podcast, and that's what I like about my YouTube channel, History with Waffles. That's what we do. We go to those places regardless of how much it costs us in time and money, and regardless of how many people are going to click those videos or click this podcast and listen, and we go tell those stories, because it's history too. It's probably the most important part of history, because without those individual soldiers, those enlisted men, those lower ranking officers that nobody knows the name of, without those people, this American Civil War is just a handful of officers that probably wouldn't fight against each other. The American Civil War is a lot more complex than just a bad guy, good guy situation. The late, great Pete Carmichael said as much himself on many podcasts, and he said it to me in person himself. It's not just about good versus evil. It's not just about bad guy, good guy. It is an extremely complex situation with a lot of different reasons as to who fought for what, with an overarching theme of saving the Union and eventually the freedom of millions of people. Gettysburg, to me, is just an ultimate place for people to visit and maybe get a taste of the American Civil War and their stories. This is the place where we all like to come together as a family and talk about our favorite subject, the American Civil War. And today, it's even more preserved than it has ever been in the past. Many things are changing in Gettysburg, just like they are across the South with a lot of these Civil War battlefields, thanks to organizations like the American Battlefield Trust. Well, I hope you all get something out of this podcast. I guess it's just a historian rambling on about the things that he likes to talk about the most, which is American Civil War and the individual stories of the men that fought that war. We're going to continue to push on with these stories while we're at locations. Sometimes you're going to hear a lot of noise in the background because I'll be on a battlefield telling a story there, and I'll think it's important enough to put in the podcast too. And sometimes it's just going to be myself talking in a quiet space about some very important stories that I hope that you'll like when we put them out there. Thanks a lot for listening, and make sure to come back. Tune in for more stories from Gettysburg. We're going to do a few more of those, and then we're going to move on to a series from Fredericksburg and continue on that path, making individual stories about the entire war and the major battles that happened throughout the American Civil War. Until next time, this is Civil War Stories with Waffles. Also, make sure to tune into our YouTube channel where we do videos on location at those battlefields and walk you through those places that are so significant. Over on our YouTube channel, History with Waffles. See you around.